The town of Brightwood, located in one of the southern states, appeared quiet and peaceful at first glance. However, beneath its surface lay a history of racial prejudice woven into the lives of many generations. At the local college, considered a prestigious educational institution, Mrs. Lorraine Hartwell reigned with an iron hand. She was known as strict but fair, or at least, that's what those who had never encountered her biases thought. Lorraine Hartwell adhered to strict standards not only in teaching, but also in how students presented themselves. She believed that discipline began with appearance, which, in her opinion, reflected inner order. However, her standards were often tinged with prejudice, especially toward students who didn't fit her idea of propriety. 17-year-old Amara Brown entered the classroom, an African-American girl who always stood out with her confidence and dignity. Her natural hair, styled into a neat and fashionable updo, attracted admiring looks from some and irritation from others. Her charm and ability to stand her ground annoyed Lorraine, who believed young people should know their place. As the students settled in, Lorraine began her lesson, but her gaze soon rested on Amara. Something about the girl's confident posture and direct gaze irritated the teacher. She decided she needed to put her in her place. "Miss Brown," she said loudly, interrupting the class discussion, "don't you think your hairstyle is a bit too elaborate for an educational environment? It's distracting others from their work." Amara, surprised by such direct criticism, tried to contain her indignation. She slowly stood up, her voice steady yet respectful. "No, Mrs. Lorraine, this is my natural hair, and I believe it's entirely appropriate." The teacher gave her a condescending look. "Natural, you say? It looks like a mess. You know, sometimes discipline isn't just about feeling it, it's about showing it." Amara quietly returned to her seat, but the tension in the room was palpable. Lorraine continued the lesson, but her irritation grew. She felt her authority had been challenged. A few minutes later, pausing mid-sentence while explaining a task, Lorraine walked over to her desk. Her eyes landed on a bottle of ink. An idea formed in her mind, one she saw as a teaching moment. She approached Amara with the ink bottle in hand. "Sometimes, to understand discipline, a little help is needed," she said. Before anyone could react, Lorraine tipped the ink bottle, pouring its contents directly onto Amara's head. Black ink dripped thickly down the girl's hair, staining her white blouse. The class gasped. The room fell into a heavy silence. "There, much better now," the teacher commented sarcastically. Amara slowly stood up. Her face didn't show tears or confusion, as Lorraine had expected, but a cold calmness. She brushed the droplets of ink from her blouse and spoke in a low, steady voice. "You just made a mistake, Mrs. Lorraine. A big mistake." She gathered her belongings and left the classroom, leaving behind a stunned whisper among the students. Lorraine, unaware of the consequences, smirked, assuming her lesson had been learned. As Amara left the classroom, the hallway was empty. Her footsteps echoed off the walls as she walked with purpose, though a storm brewed inside her. Deep breaths helped her maintain composure, but the weight of the ink in her hair and the stains on her clothing were constant reminders of the humiliation she had just endured. Behind her, hurried footsteps broke the silence. It was her friend, Sarah, a blonde, outspoken advocate for justice. Sarah caught up with Amara, practically breathless from indignation. "Are you just going to let this go?" Sarah burst out. "Amara, that was pure racism. You have to report her." Amara stopped and turned to her friend, her expression calm but firm. "No, Sarah. This situation calls for more than a simple complaint. I'm not letting her off with just a slap on the wrist." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked, confused. "It starts at home," Amara replied as she resumed walking. When Amara arrived home, her mother, Charlotte Brown, the town's mayor and a well-known advocate for justice, greeted her at the door. Charlotte was a strong, determined woman who had spent her life confronting injustice, whether in politics or daily life. The moment she saw her daughter's disheveled appearance, ink-stained hair and clothing, her face darkened with concern. "What happened?" Charlotte asked sternly, her sharp eyes fixed on Amara. "There was an incident in class," Amara said simply, brushing her ink-streaked hair away from her face. "But it's more than just an incident. It's about who I am and what some people think is acceptable." Amara recounted the entire story in detail, leaving nothing out. Charlotte listened intently, her face a mixture of anger and resolve. When Amara finished, her mother's response was decisive. "You were right to stay composed and not cause a scene there," Charlotte said. "But we're not letting this slide. We're going to handle this, not just for you, but for everyone who has faced similar humiliation." Charlotte immediately sprang into action. She called her assistant to arrange a meeting with the college's principal and contacted several influential figures in the town to ensure the incident received the attention it deserved. For her, this wasn't just about personal offense. It was an opportunity to address a broader issue of racial discrimination. Meanwhile, back at the college, word of the incident spread like wildfire. Students couldn't keep quiet about what they had witnessed. Videos began circulating online, where classmates recounted what had happened, calling out the teacher's behavior. Within hours, the story reached the wider community. Mrs. Lorraine Hartwell continued her day, convinced that her disciplinary action had gone unnoticed beyond her classroom. But by the end of the day, she began to notice the stares, judging and questioning, from colleagues and students alike. Her fellow teacher, Mr. James, approached her in the faculty lounge. "Lorraine, did you do something today?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "The whole college is talking about it." "I simply enforced discipline," Lorraine replied curtly, still confident in her righteousness. "Well, whatever you did, it's caused quite the uproar," James said. "You might want to brace yourself." At the same time, the town's residents began to rally. Citizens shared the videos and voiced their outrage online. Many called for protests outside the college. Charlotte Brown prepared an official statement, scheduled a press conference, and reached out to local journalists. For Lorraine, it was supposed to be just another ordinary day. But she had no idea that her lesson was about to turn into a nightmare. The next morning, the college became the epicenter of a growing movement that shook the entire town. Outside the main entrance, a crowd gathered, students, parents, community leaders, and journalists all united in outrage. Protesters held signs with messages like, "No racism in education," "Justice for Amara," and "Discrimination has no place here." Asterisk, asterisk. Charlotte Brown, always poised and diplomatic, stood at the forefront. Today she looked every bit the leader she was, commanding and resolute. Surrounded by reporters and cameras, she held a microphone, ready to address the town. "Yesterday, my daughter, Amara Brown, was subjected to a shocking act of racial discrimination," she began, her voice steady but firm. "A teacher, a person entrusted with the education and inspiration of our children, humiliated her for simply being herself. This is unacceptable. We are here today to say that this kind of behavior will no longer be tolerated in our schools, in our town, or anywhere else." Her words were met with cheers and applause from the crowd. Her speech was broadcast live on local news channels and quickly spread across social media, gaining traction far beyond the town's borders. The community, galvanized by her words, began to demand not just accountability, but systemic change. Inside the college, the atmosphere was tense. Principal Hopkins, aware of the escalating situation, called Mrs. Lorraine Hartwell to his office. When she arrived, she tried to project her usual confidence, but her rigid posture and darting eyes betrayed her unease. "Do you realize what you've done?" Hopkins demanded, leaning over his desk. "The entire town is talking about this. Parents are calling non-stop, demanding your resignation." "I simply did what I thought was necessary," Lorraine replied stubbornly. "Discipline is important." "Discipline?" Hopkins shot back, his voice rising. "You poured ink on a student's head. That's not discipline. It's humiliation. It's racism." Lorraine's face reddened, and for a moment she was at a loss for words. But before she could respond, Hopkins delivered a stern ultimatum. "At today's open meeting, you will apologize to Amara, her family, and the community. And prepare yourself. This won't end here." Meanwhile, Amara's classmates began sharing their own experiences with Lorraine. Many revealed that her condescending and biased behavior was not an isolated incident. These stories further fueled public outrage, and protesters outside the college grew more vocal, demanding not just an apology, but Lorraine's immediate dismissal. By mid-afternoon, the college auditorium was filled to capacity. On the stage sat Charlotte, Amara, Principal Hopkins, and Lorraine, who appeared visibly uncomfortable under the intense scrutiny of hundreds of eyes. The room fell silent as Lorraine reluctantly approached the microphone. "I apologize for my actions," she said stiffly. "It was a mistake, an inappropriate way to address my concerns." Charlotte stood and interrupted, her voice clear and unwavering. "An apology is not enough. This is about more than one incident. This is about respect, dignity, and the systemic issues that allowed this to happen." The room erupted into applause, and Lorraine visibly faltered. She realized her words had done little to pacify the crowd. She returned to her seat, staring at the floor as Charlotte and Amara took center stage. Amara, calm and composed, addressed the audience. "This isn't just about me. It's about ensuring that no one else has to go through what I did. We need to hold people accountable and make real changes to prevent discrimination in our schools." Her words resonated deeply, drawing a standing ovation from the crowd. Lorraine sat motionless, realizing for the first time that her actions had ignited something far greater than a disciplinary issue. It had become a movement for justice. The aftermath of the public meeting left a wave of anticipation and determination throughout the town. While Amara's calm and powerful words inspired hope, the community's demands for accountability were louder than ever. Simply apologizing wasn't enough. People wanted justice and systemic change. That evening, Principal Hopkins released an official statement. In it, he condemned Mrs. Lorraine Hartwell's actions, confirming her immediate suspension while an investigation took place. The announcement was an attempt to calm the growing tension, but for many, it was too little, too late. For Lorraine, the suspension marked a significant blow. Confined to her home, she avoided answering calls and emails, overwhelmed by the realization that her reputation was irreparably damaged. The unwavering confidence she had clung to so tightly began to crumble. Everywhere she turned, her actions were being discussed, criticized, and condemned. Meanwhile, Amara and Charlotte sat together in their living room, preparing for their upcoming interview on a local news station. Amara's hair had been carefully washed and styled, though remnants of the ink-stained memory lingered in her mind. "Are you sure you want to do this, sweetheart?" Charlotte asked, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Yes," Amara replied with quiet resolve. "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's ever been made to feel less than for being who they are." The following day, the two appeared on live television. The host welcomed them with warmth and empathy, giving them the space to share their story. Amara recounted the incident with grace, her words measured but powerful. "I don't hold hatred in my heart for Mrs. Hartwell," she said near the end of the interview, "but I do hope she and others like her can learn from this. Our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Discrimination has no place in education or anywhere else." Charlotte added, "This is more than an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a larger problem. We need to address systemic racism in our schools, workplaces, and communities. It's time for change, and it starts here." Their appearance struck a chord with viewers across the town and beyond. Messages of support flooded in, and their story quickly gained traction nationwide. Amara became a symbol of resilience and dignity, while Charlotte's call to action inspired community leaders to organize forums and initiatives focused on combating racial bias. Back at the college, Lorraine's suspension turned into permanent dismissal following the conclusion of the investigation. Principal Hopkins addressed the faculty and students in a campus-wide email, reiterating the school's commitment to diversity and respect. As news of Lorraine's dismissal spread, a group of students created a petition calling for broader changes to ensure a safe and inclusive environment for all. Within days, the petition gained thousands of signatures, prompting the college to implement new training programs for staff and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. For Amara, the end of this chapter marked the beginning of a new role in her life. She became a voice for others, speaking at local schools and events about her experience and the importance of standing up for justice. Her story resonated deeply, inspiring many to reflect on their own biases and take action. One evening, as she sat at her desk finishing homework, Amara noticed an envelope addressed to her. It was from Lorraine Hartwell. Inside was a brief letter. Amara, I have spent the past weeks reflecting on my actions and their impact. I deeply regret the pain I caused you. Your strength has humbled me, and your forgiveness has opened my eyes. I have much to learn, but I am determined to be better. Sincerely, Mrs. Hartwell. Amara folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start. For her, the journey wasn't just about a single apology, but about ensuring no one else would ever have to endure the same injustice. The town of Brightwood changed that day. Amara's resilience, Charlotte's leadership, and the community's unity turned a moment of injustice into a movement for progress. It was a powerful reminder that even in the face of discrimination, hope, strength, and collective action could bring about meaningful change.